I pulled into that gravel driveway thinking I was finally coming home, and instead, I felt like I had stepped into somebody else's nightmare. Bright orange trespassing signs nailed to every tree, slapped across the front door, even jammed into the ground, along the fence line like little neon soldiers screaming that I didn't belong here. 3 years, that's how long I'd been gone, 3 long years taking care of my mother as she faded away from Alzheimer's. I buried her just 6 months ago, and all I wanted was to scatter her ashes by the old bridge where she and my dad had their first date. I thought I'd find peace in this place. What I found was Martha Kane waving a clipboard like it was a sword, screaming, "You don't live here anymore on land my father built with his own hands." It's hard to explain what that feels like to have grief still pressing on your chest, and then have some self-appointed queen tell you your family's place is now abandoned property. I walked up with my fists balled, but I tried to keep my voice steady. "This is my family's cabin," I told her, holding out my ID. She barely looked at it, just gave me one of those tight little smiles that never touches the eyes and said, "Temporary preservation order. Safety hazards. 24 hours to respond, or the county takes over." Her crew kept moving around me, snapping photos of the porch, measuring trees, even trying the front door like they owned the place. When one of them rattled the handle, I felt rage so sharp it made my vision swim. That night, I sat in the kitchen, surrounded by the smell of old wood and lavender sachets my mom had left, dialing lawyer after lawyer, getting nowhere. Retainers, wait lists, polite voices telling me there was nothing they could do in less than 3 weeks. I was about to give up when a man named Daniel Ward called me back. Smooth voice, confident, said he specialized in emergency land disputes. He drove up an hour later in a neat sedan, briefcase in hand, paperwork, already filled out with my case number. He sounded like exactly what I needed. Too good, maybe, but when you're desperate, competence feels like salvation. He slid a document across the table, limited power of attorney. "Standard practice," he said. "Without this, they'll steamroll you." I signed. I thought I was protecting myself. I was really handing over the keys to the wolves. The next day, my neighbor Ellen stopped by. She's been in these mountains longer than most, the kind who notices when you cut your grass 2 days late. She lowered her voice and said, "She pulled this stunt with the Petersons back in 2019. Same signs, same paperwork. They lost their place within 6 months. She showed me photos she'd hidden away Martha in a blazer, shaking hands with men in suits, survey maps spread on the hood of a car. And then she said something that made my stomach flip. Your daddy knew she was trouble years ago. That's why he filed those historical preservation papers back in the 90s. Later that evening, I drove past the creek behind the property, and there it was, Daniel's sedan parked right beside Martha's truck. The two of them standing shoulder to shoulder, pointing at survey markers like business partners. My hands were shaking as I lifted my phone and snapped photos. When they noticed my truck, I didn't hide. I drove right up and got out. "Interesting place for a legal consultation," I said. Daniel's smile dropped instantly. "Nothing personal, Jack. Just business." And Martha added, smug as ever, "You signed the papers yourself. Everything is completely legal." In that moment, it hit me like a freight train. The lawyer I thought was saving me had been her partner the whole time. Martha wasn't just playing the law, she was playing the neighbors too. She held a meeting at the community hall, putting on a show about fire hazards and declining property values. She had chart statistics, the whole production. She turned me into the villain, the careless owner endangering everyone's safety. Folks nodded along. A few even clapped. When I stood to speak, she cut me off with syrupy sympathy. "We understand hardships, but personal struggles don't erase responsibilities." I realized then I wasn't just fighting her. I was fighting the whole stage she'd built around me. What she didn't know was my dad had been preparing for this long, before either of us stepped into that hall. Behind his old workbench, I found survey equipment, stacks of documents and maps showing water flow and mineral rights that dated back to the 1800s. My dad wasn't just a construction worker. He'd spent decades documenting the legal backbone of this land. He knew someday someone would try to take it. There was even a key marked Bridge Emergency. Suddenly, his warnings made sense. He wasn't paranoid. He was building a shield. Things escalated fast. Her crew started tearing into the porch, tagging beams claiming structural instability. They even cracked a wooden carving my father made for my mother. During her illness, hearts intertwined, now split down the middle. I picked up the broken piece and cut my hand on the splintered edge. It felt like bleeding right into the wound. They were carving through my family's legacy. Martha stood there with that false sympathy and said, "Unfortunate but necessary safety measures." My blood literally on the wood, and she called it necessary. The final straw came when Ellen showed me letters connecting Martha and Daniel to a development corporation, $20 million riding on acquiring water rights under my land. They weren't just stealing a cabin. They were stealing the key to an entire mountain's aquifer. At the county hearing, Martha strutted in like a CEO, corporate lawyers flanking her. Daniel sat in the front row, pretending to be my attorney. Neighbors filled the room expecting to see me get steamrolled. I walked up with my dad's old laptop, connected it to the projector, and hit play. The screen lit up with trail camera footage, Daniel surveying my property months before he ever called me, Martha rehearsing forged documents with him, corporate suits discussing acquisition theater. The room went silent, then erupted in whispers. Ellen stood up and shouted, "She's selling our water." Federal marshals walked in as the last video played, showing Martha coaching Daniel through forgery. "Make sure the signatures look natural," she said on camera. The marshals stepped forward, reading charges of fraud and conspiracy. Daniel's real name, Kevin Turner, spilled out in the indictment. He was wanted across 3 states. Martha lost it right there in the hall, screaming about obedience and perfection, ripping cables out of the wall until the lights flickered. Neighbors who once nodded at her statistics now stared in horror as the mask slipped completely. They cuffed her, but even strapped to a gurney. After a chase gone wrong, she kept ranting. "This town only works when people obey. Perfect means no questions." That video went viral within hours. Folks across the country saw her meltdown, saw neighbors like mine realize they'd been pawns in a corporate scam. In court, my father's documents proved what he'd always known. This land carried federal protection, dating back over a century. The development company collapsed under investigation. The neighbors rebuilt the porch my dad had crafted, and I finally scattered my mother's ashes at that bridge. Peaceful water wind through the pines, the place where their love started and where their legacy now lives on. But the story didn't end with Martha in handcuffs. Hidden inside that repaired carving of hearts, I found one more secret, a small USB drive labeled in my father's handwriting for my grandchildren. I haven't opened it yet. Maybe tomorrow. Maybe next year. But I know one thing: Dad was fighting a battle bigger than just this cabin, and now it's my turn to carry it forward. So tell me, this was Martha, just a corrupt neighbor blinded by greed, or was she a cog in something much larger that's been stealing land from families like mine for generations? Drop your thoughts in the comments, because this isn't just my story. It's about what happens when power, money, and community trust collide. And I want to know where you stand. If you've ever seen something like this in your own town, share it, because sunlight is the only thing that scares people like Martha.